The slap came before I could even blink. My head snapped to the side, and the glass of Coke slipped from my hand, spilling across the marble floor of Monarch Bay Ballroom. 180 guests froze mid-toast. The orchestra stopped. The air itself seemed to break. I felt the sting bloom across my cheek, but it was the silence that hurt more. 180 people watched as my Coke splashed across the marble, dark against the white floor. My daughter-in-law, Samantha, didn't flinch. In her wedding gown, framed by gold light, she looked almost regal as she shouted, "Give me the keys, Catherine! The villa's ours now!" Her voice echoed through the chandeliers. My son Daniel stood beside her, eyes down, jaw tight, pretending not to see. The room smelled of roses and spilled soda. I bent down slowly, picking up my fallen clutch. No one helped. Not one. And as I rose again, my hand still shaking, I thought, if this is how they begin their marriage, they'll remember how it ends. The dinner plates had barely cleared when Samantha rose from her seat. The lights followed her as she took the microphone, her smile practiced, her tone honeyed. "We'd like to thank everyone," she said, pausing for effect, "especially Daniel's wonderful mother." Cameras turned toward me. I stood automatically, hands resting on my clutch. Her eyes sparkled under the chandeliers. "She's been such a generous woman." The laughter that followed wasn't cruel, but it stung all the same. I smiled, a gesture of habit, not warmth. I could feel 180 eyes shift toward me, measuring my reaction, waiting for some show of pride or irritation. I gave them neither. Samantha's voice carried over the soft applause, smooth as glass. "Truly, we owe her everything." She dipped her head slightly, a queen offering mercy. I sat down before she finished. Her tone wrapped gratitude around mockery like ribbon on a knife. Samantha lingered on stage, her expression brightening as if struck by sudden inspiration. "There's one more thing," she said, tilting her head. "My husband and I have always dreamed of beginning our life in his mother's Ocean View villa." The sound that spread across the ballroom was a mixture of gasps and low laughter. Someone clapped nervously. Flashbulbs went off. "Mom," she continued, turning toward me with outstretched hand, "will you gift us the keys? Tonight?" My pulse slowed to a steady ache. Every camera lens was aimed at my face, hungry for the moment. Daniel smiled weakly beside her, the kind of smile that begged to disappear. I didn't move. My hand rested over my clutch, feeling the cold shape of the keys inside. I met Samantha's eyes. They gleamed with triumph, polished and cruel. She didn't ask. She performed the theft. Around us, the chandeliers flickered as if the room itself held its breath. I rose from my chair slowly, letting the silence stretch. "No, Samantha," I said, each word steady, even. "The villa isn't a gift." A ripple moved through the room. Samantha blinked, then laughed too loudly. "Oh, come on, it's just a gesture," she said, her voice bright but cracking at the edges. Daniel shifted beside her, hands tightening around his glass. The orchestra faltered, one violin string snapping in the pause. I kept my gaze fixed on her. "Some things are not forgiving," I said quietly. My calm made her tremble more than anger ever could. She looked around, waiting for someone to laugh, but no one did. The air grew heavier, thick with embarrassment she couldn't hide. I remained standing, every inch of me unshaken. I'd rather be silent than surrender. Samantha's breath hitched. The smile vanished from her face. "Fine," she hissed. "Keep your precious villa." She reached for the nearest glass, a tall one filled with dark Coke, and hurled it at me. The liquid splashed across my face, cold, sticky, shockingly sweet. Gasps cut through the music. Cameras clicked in a storm of flashes. I blinked once, pearls around my neck glistening with brown drops. The Coke dripped down my silk dress, tracing slow paths to the marble floor. Daniel's chair scraped back, but he didn't move closer. Around us, the guests froze, unsure which side to take. My fingers found my clutch, the small anchor in my hand. I dabbed the stain with my napkin, slow and deliberate. I would not give them the spectacle they wanted. The coke dripped down my pearls, sweeter than their lies. Somewhere behind me, the orchestra stopped breathing. The room fell silent. The orchestra stopped mid-song, bows frozen in the air. No one moved. The marble shimmered under the chandeliers, the coke pooling at my feet. I lifted the napkin from the table and wiped my cheek slowly. The fabric caught the last trace of soda, dark against white. I folded it neatly, placed it beside my glass, and straightened my shoulders. Samantha stood panting, her face blotched with anger and fear. Daniel whispered her name, his voice barely a sound. Around us, 180 people stared, the echo of their laughter gone. I turned to them, calm, deliberate. For the first time that night, they saw me. Their silence wasn't pity. It was respect, reclaimed. My heels clicked against the marble as I walked toward the exit. The air behind me stayed still, heavy, ashamed. Each step sounded louder than the music that had stopped playing. Outside, the night air hit my skin like water after flame. I inhaled, slow and deep, letting the chill clear the taste of sugar and shame. The wind from the ocean carried the faint hum of laughter from the ballroom, already fading. I reached into my clutch, found my phone, and unlocked the screen with steady fingers. The number was already saved. I pressed call. "It happened," I said quietly. "Start the process." There was a pause, then Michael's voice. "Understood." I ended the call and looked at my reflection in the glass door of a parked car. My cheek still burned, but my heartbeat had slowed. They saw weakness tonight. What they didn't see was the months I had spent preparing evidence, recording conversations, waiting for this moment. I wasn't broken. I was ready. The wind swept through my hair, lifting the last trace of their laughter away. I walked down the corridor toward the hotel's main exit. The floor gleamed under crystal light, mirrors lining both sides like witnesses. My reflection moved beside me. Older, calmer, unshaken. The stain on my dress caught the chandelier glow, turning dark amber, a mark of survival. I paused in front of one mirror. The woman looking back wasn't humiliated. Her eyes were steady, her mouth composed. I raised my hand and brushed a strand of hair behind my ear, watching her do the same. For the first time in years, I didn't look small. I looked certain. The coke stain no longer felt like dirt. It looked like armor. The wind from the open lobby door stirred the hem of my gown, cool air meeting warm skin. I took one last breath, then stepped forward. The woman in the mirror wasn't broken. She'd begun. The night outside waited, wide and clear. Rain struck the glass walls of the Ocean View Villa, each drop sharp as memory. I sat in the dark, still wearing the stained gown, its silk heavy with dried sugar. The sea rolled below, white waves catching the porch light like restless ghosts. I replayed the ballroom in silence, the laughter, the gasp, the coke cooling on my skin. My reflection in the window looked older, but not weaker. Slowly, I opened the drawer beside me and pulled out a thick folder. Inside was the property deed, the Ocean View valuation marked at $3 million. I placed it on the desk next to the folded napkin I had used to wipe my face. The two objects sat side by side, humiliation and ownership. I ran my fingers across the embossed seal and nodded once. Tears blur truth. Numbers don't. Outside, the rain tapped like a clock, counting down to something inevitable. Morning light fell cold across Michael Grant's office. He stood by the window, jacket crisp, silver pen turning between his fingers. I laid my phone on the table and pressed play. The ballroom scene filled the room. Samantha's voice, the laughter, the splash. Michael's jaw tightened. "They humiliated you in public," he said quietly. "I know," I answered, steady. "That's why it's time we make the next move." He nodded, calm but precise. I handed him a small flash drive containing screenshots, bank records, and messages Samantha had sent to Daniel. "They turned it into a show," I said. "I'll turn it into evidence." He placed the pen down, the sound small but final. On his laptop screen, the first frame froze on Samantha's raised hand, Coke midair. "We'll proceed," he said. The reflection of the window cut across the table like a line between past and strategy. The doorbell rang just after noon. I already knew who it was. Daniel stood in the doorway, collar loose, guilt stitched into every breath. "Samantha didn't mean it," he said quickly. I stepped aside, motioning him in. The villa smelled of salt and morning coffee. I poured tea, letting the silence stretch until he fidgeted. "She just lost her temper," he continued. "We all did." I handed him the cup, watching the steam rise between us. He avoided my eyes. "Mom," he said softly, "maybe we should transfer the villa's name now, for taxes, just so it's easier later." His words landed like stones. He spoke, but her voice came out of his mouth. I smiled faintly and nodded. "I'll think about it," I said. He looked relieved, too easily. Outside, a seagull cried over the waves. When the door closed behind him, the house exhaled the truth he didn't. When the house grew quiet again, I sat at my desk, the light from the bay pale against my screen. I drafted an email to my financial advisor, considering future inheritance transfer, requesting a preliminary outline. My fingers moved slowly, each word deliberate. I copied Michael on the message, his address hidden in blind copy. The cursor blinked, waiting. I read the email once more, ensuring every line sounded uncertain, believable. Every lie needs sunlight to bloom. I hovered over send, breathing evenly, then I clicked. The sound of the sent chime was soft but decisive. Outside, the rain had stopped. The glass walls reflected the ocean, calm now, as if waiting for me to act again. I closed the laptop, folded my hands, and let the quiet settle like the start of a plan. In another part of the city, Samantha lounged on the edge of her bed, phone light flickering against her face. She scrolled through Daniel's messages until she stopped at the forwarded email from me. The subject line read, "Considering inheritance transfer." Her eyes sharpened. For a moment she said nothing. Then the corner of her mouth curved upward, a slow, satisfied smile. She leaned closer to the screen, rereading the message twice. The reflection of her own grin shimmered in the gold-framed mirror across the room. She picked up her phone and dialed. "She's finally giving it up," she whispered. A laugh answered from the other end, quick and eager. Samantha's red lips brushed the rim of her glass as she murmured, "Soon, it's ours." The glow from the phone washed over her face, bright and warm, like a small fire she thought she controlled. Some traps don't need bait, just greed. The next afternoon, I met Linda Hayes at a quiet cafe overlooking the harbor. She was composed, mid-40s, hair tied back, eyes sharp and calm. "I specialize in quiet work," she said, setting her coffee aside. Michael had already briefed her. We unfolded a map of the Ocean View Villa across the table, marking the study, the hall, and the upstairs office. "They'll come for the files soon," I murmured. She nodded, tapping a pen against the blueprint. "Then we'll make sure they leave proof behind." I watched her draw circles around camera placements, each mark neat and precise. "Truth doesn't hide in shadows," she said, her tone almost kind. "It waits there." I signed the contract, the pen gliding smoothly. She folded the map, slipped it into her bag, and stood. Outside, the light bounced off a passing car window, a brief reflection that felt like the first piece of order returning. Night settled over the villa in shades of quiet gold. I placed the forged transfer deed, Michael's careful handiwork, inside my desk drawer, leaving the corner of the folder slightly exposed. Linda worked silently beside me, attaching microcameras under the shelf, near the frame, behind the lamp. Their red dots blinked once, alive. "They'll come when I'm not here," I said softly. She nodded, testing one lens, adjusting the focus. The hum of the ocean filled the silence between us. I walked through the house, turning off each light in sequence, the study, the hallway, the terrace, each click echoing like a countdown. When I reached the front door, only the moonlight remained, spilling across the marble floor. I looked back once, at the drawer left half open, Greed never closes doors. The camera light blinked in the dark, steady as breath. I locked the door, pocketed the keys, and stepped into the waiting night. Evening fell over the coast, turning the water to glass. I sat by the window, the light dimming around me, the villa quiet except for the ticking clock on the far wall. The reflection of the sea shimmered across the window pane, silver and still. I had learned that silence wasn't weakness, it was storage. Every breath I took felt measured, each second folded neatly into the next. The phone on the table buzzed once, its glow soft against the shadows. Daniel's name appeared on the screen. "We'll visit tomorrow." I read it twice, then placed the phone face down. Outside, the waves hit the rocks in steady rhythm, calm before the change. I looked at the keys on the table, their surface catching the last trace of light. Some wars are won before the enemy arrives. The dusk deepened to violet, and the wind brushed the glass like a whisper. Morning sunlight poured through the balcony doors, pale and new. I brewed tea, the scent of jasmine curling through the quiet kitchen. When the gate buzzer rang, I already knew who stood outside. Daniel's voice came first, cheerful and uncertain. Behind him, Samantha smiled, bouquet in hand, her lipstick too red for morning. "We wanted to apologize," she said sweetly. I opened the door, calm. "Come in." The air shifted as they stepped inside. Their shoes clicked on marble, echoing against the high ceiling. Samantha handed me the flowers, her fingers cool. "You've built such a beautiful place," she murmured. I thanked her and motioned to the living room. The teapot steamed between us, soft hiss filling the space. I stirred sugar into my cup and watched her reflection shimmer in the tea's surface. They came with flowers. I smelled smoke. Behind their smiles, something sharp waited to unfold. The tea cooled slowly between us. Samantha stood, eyes drifting across the room like a surveyor. "This house is stunning," she said, tracing her hand along the polished railing. "So much space for one person." Her tone carried concern, but her gaze moved like calculation. Daniel stayed seated, pretending to admire the view. I followed Samantha's steps as she wandered toward the study. Her heels clicked softly, pausing near the closed door. "You must feel lonely here," she said, voice floating back. I smiled faintly. "Not really." She glanced over her shoulder, measuring my face, then the walls, then the doorknob glinting in light. Her eyes measured walls like currency. I returned to the table, pouring more tea. Behind me, I heard her footsteps linger by the handle, the faint brush of curiosity disguised as care. I waited, patient, knowing exactly what she was searching for and why she'd return. Samantha rejoined the table, cheeks flushed from her quiet exploration. "Daniel mentioned you were considering that inheritance transfer," she said casually, lifting her cup. The steam blurred her smile. Daniel nodded too quickly, his spoon clinking against porcelain. I stirred my tea once, the rhythm slow and even. "Yes," I said softly. "I've been thinking." Her eyes flashed, a spark too eager to hide. "It's the right thing to do," she replied. I nodded again, meeting her gaze with calm patience. The clock on the wall ticked louder than it should have. A seagull cried outside, sharp and distant. She believed every word I didn't say. When greed hears a whisper, it promises a visit. I set my cup down, the sound small but deliberate. Samantha smiled, convinced the house was already half hers. I smiled too, because the plan was already whole. The trap had started breathing. The sky deepened into indigo as I closed the last drawer in my study. From the window, the sea looked like ink spilling over the horizon. I locked the front door and left the villa lights glowing behind me. A few minutes later, my car rolled down the quiet street. Across the road, Linda waited inside her parked sedan, camera ready, the red light steady on her dash. I caught her reflection in the rearview mirror as I passed. One nod, nothing more. The house stood still, its white walls soft against the dark. One by one, the lights inside began to fade. Living room, hall, study, until only the outline of the roof caught the moonlight. Silence filled the gaps where sound had lived all day. Silence doesn't hide truth. It invites it in. Linda lifted her camera, focused on the villa gate, and waited. The night folded itself neatly around the plan. At 10, the gate clicked open. Daniel's car lights flickered once, then went dark. They stepped out quietly, shoes crunching over gravel. Samantha entered the code she'd memorized, the green light blinking permission. "She won't mind," she whispered. Her laughter was low, too confident. Inside, the villa smelled faintly of jasmine and salt. Daniel hesitated near the staircase, glancing up at the darkened windows. "Just hurry," she hissed. They slipped into the study, flashlights slicing through the quiet. Samantha pulled open the top drawer, rifling through folders. "Found it," she breathed. Daniel's shoulders eased. The lock clicked, and so did the camera. A faint red dot pulsed behind the bookshelf, watching everything. Samantha brushed her hair aside, smiling as she lifted the envelope marked "Transfer Deed." The sound of paper sliding free was sharper than thunder. They didn't hear the second click, the one that would write their story for them. Samantha laid the papers across the desk, her hands trembling with triumph. "Look at this," she whispered. The bold heading read, "Transfer to Daniel and Samantha Reed." Her reflection shimmered in the glossy page. "It's practically done," she said, her voice a breath away from laughter. Daniel frowned, hesitant. "Are you sure?" "She's giving it to us," she insisted. "I'm just making sure it's signed." She handed him the pen, gold and heavy. Together they bent over the page. Every signature carved its own confession. The camera light blinked softly, a heartbeat in the corner. When they finished, Samantha kissed him on the cheek. "Now it's real," she whispered. She folded the fake deed carefully and tucked it into her purse, unaware that every movement, every word, every stolen second was being recorded in crystal clarity. The fountain pen rolled across the desk and stopped against the edge, still warm from their hands. From her car across the street, Linda adjusted the zoom on her tablet, the glow reflecting in her eyes. The live feed showed Samantha sealing the envelope, Daniel looking pale beside her. She tapped the record icon again, double-checking the timestamp. "They're doing exactly what we expected," she murmured into her phone. Michael's voice came through, calm and clipped. "Good. Keep rolling." Linda nodded, her fingers steady on the camera controls. "They wrote their own verdict," she whispered. A gust of wind rattled the car mirror, scattering the reflection of the villa lights across her windshield. She scribbled notes: time, action, evidence, then switched angles, zooming in on the purse as Samantha slid the fake deed inside. The red light of the recorder blinked twice, confirming the upload to cloud storage. The job was done, but she stayed, watching the house breathe under the moon. The night hummed with quiet justice. Dawn painted the sky silver over the Ocean View villa. I stood in the garden, watering the roses. The petals caught each drop, shining like new glass. Birds began their soft chatter, unaware of the night before. My phone buzzed once. A message from Linda. "Got everything." I typed back a single word. "Perfect." The water flowed steady, the rhythm slow, soothing. Inside the villa, the morning light crept across the study floor, touching the empty drawer, the faint outline of fingerprints on polished wood. I didn't need to check the footage. I already knew what it showed. They thought they stole a house. They gifted me proof. I turned toward the ocean, the horizon wide and bright. The breeze carried the scent of salt and roses. The garden swayed in quiet applause, and the day began with peace only truth could earn. 2 weeks later, I returned to Monarch Bay. The same chandeliers hung from the ceiling, spilling light across the same marble floor where Coke had once dripped down my pearls. The hotel had changed nothing. Only I had. I wore a pearl gray suit, simple, tailored, unshakable. Michael and Linda walked beside me as we entered the ballroom. 180 guests again, same laughter, same orchestra tuning its strings. But when the doors opened and I stepped in, the sound collapsed into silence. Heads turned. The whispers spread like static across silk. Samantha's friends stared. Daniel froze mid-toast. I moved slowly through the aisle, heels clicking in steady rhythm against marble. The chandeliers swayed above me, gold light dancing across my face. I stopped near the center of the room, the same spot I'd been humiliated. They thought they'd erased me from the guest list. I wrote myself back in. A murmur rippled through the tables. "Isn't that her?" someone whispered. "The mother-in-law from the wedding." Forks stilled midair. Champagne flutes trembled in hands. Samantha's laughter cut short, caught in her throat. Daniel straightened, his smile fading into a blank line. I paused near the same table where I had stood before, the memory of that night pulsing faintly under the marble. The orchestra waited, instruments raised, uncertain. 100 eyes traced every step I took. No one spoke, no one dared. I turned slightly, met Samantha's gaze, and offered a small nod. This time, silence bowed to me. The candles flickered in unison, their light reflected in the glassware like tiny mirrors. The air thickened, heavy with recognition. Across the ballroom, I heard a single glass clink, then nothing. Power had changed its seat. Samantha forced a smile, voice sugar-coated and sharp. "Mrs. Monroe," she said, "I didn't expect you'd dare come back." I tilted my head slightly, my tone calm. Neither did I. But then, truth insists. A soft hum spread through the guests, a breath between disbelief and fascination. Daniel shifted beside her, eyes darting toward Michael standing behind me. Samantha's lips tightened. "You're not welcome here," she said too quickly. I placed my clutch on the table, aligning it with the edge. "I didn't come for welcome," I said quietly. "I came for closure." The words hung like glass suspended in air. The memory of the Coke splash returned in flashes. Dark liquid, camera clicks, her grin. Now it was her turn to taste the sting of spotlight. Samantha swallowed, her smile cracking as her reflection trembled in the golden lights around her. Michael stepped forward, calm and deliberate. The crowd parted slightly, whispers halting mid-breath. He carried a brown folder under his arm, its seal unbroken. Reaching the microphone, he adjusted it once, the soft feedback echoing through the hall. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice steady, "I'm here on behalf of Mrs. Catherine Monroe regarding urgent legal matters concerning this family." The air thinned, every sound pulled toward the stage. Cameras lifted. Samantha turned pale, her hand tightening around Daniel's sleeve. He said nothing. I watched, still. The rustle of paper sounded louder than applause. "You wanted witnesses," I murmured to myself. "Now you'll have them." The chandeliers above flickered, light spilling like judgment across every face. Michael paused, eyes sweeping the crowd. The hush deepened. The same ballroom that had once echoed with my disgrace now waited for the truth to be spoken aloud. Michael unfolded the papers, the gold pen glinting between his fingers. His tone stayed precise, each word measured. "To Mr. Daniel Monroe and Mrs. Samantha Reed Monroe," he read, "the financial guarantee you've been receiving from Mrs. Monroe has been permanently terminated. All related accounts and transfers have been closed." A wave of gasps spread through the ballroom. The echo touched every corner of the marble hall. Samantha's color drained. Her lipstick looked too bright now, her confidence too thin. Daniel blinked, caught between shame and disbelief. Michael continued, voice unshaken. "All further attempts to access her estate or holdings will be considered fraudulent under federal law." The silence afterward was heavy, alive. They didn't know the hand that fed them could also write their verdict. I watched Samantha's fingers tremble as she reached for a glass of champagne. The reflection of her hand wavered in the stem's curve, a perfect mirror of collapse. Michael adjusted his glasses and continued reading, his voice calm against the growing noise. "Additionally," he said, "all prior debts covered by Mrs. Monroe's accounts, including the ballroom expenses of this event, are hereby rescinded. Payment is due immediately." The words struck like a bell in the marble hall. The guests turned toward one another, whispering fast, nervous laughter breaking through the tension. Someone at the bar set down a glass too hard. It cracked at the rim. Samantha's eyes darted around the room, panic flaring beneath the glitter of the chandeliers. Daniel's face drained of color. The hotel manager stepped forward quietly, uncertain whether to speak. Cameras flashed, the light reflecting off Michael's papers like sudden lightning. I stood still, hands folded, watching the chaos bloom. They bought their own downfall on credit. The orchestra packed up silently, bowstrings muted. The laughter that had once mocked me now dissolved into frightened murmurs. The marble floor gleamed again, but this time it wasn't my reflection that trembled. Samantha's chair screeched backward as she lunged toward me, eyes wild. "You can't do this! We're family!" Her voice cracked on the last word, echoing through the ballroom. Guests stepped back, the crowd widening into a silent ring around us. I met her gaze evenly. "Family doesn't hit," I said softly. "Family doesn't steal." The room stilled. Daniel looked at me, then at her, as if realizing both statements at once. Samantha's hands trembled, her breath came fast. "You planned this," she hissed. I didn't answer. She shouted again, "You humiliated me!" I lifted my chin. "You hit me with coke, not shame." Gasps rippled across the tables. "I was the fool who thought kindness would protect me," I said, my tone flat, certain. The chandeliers swayed gently above us, scattering gold across the marble. Samantha stepped back, shaking her head, lips parted but empty. The silence after her collapse was deafening. I stepped forward, my heels steady on the marble. Michael handed me a single document, the title deed of Ocean View Villa. I held it high enough for the crowd to see. "This is the home you tried to take," I said, my voice calm, almost gentle. "But a house built on lies collapses on its own." The room stayed still for one heartbeat, then the sound of applause rose slowly from the back. I saw faces softening, heads nodding. Even those who had laughed at me before now looked down at their plates. "I lived quietly," I continued. "They mistook quiet for weakness." I paused, letting the words settle. "They will never make that mistake again." Samantha stood motionless, mascara streaking her cheeks, while Daniel lowered his eyes to the floor. The golden light caught the edge of the deed, turning it almost translucent. I placed it back into Michael's folder and turned toward the door, the sound of my own footsteps steady and whole. By dawn, the story had escaped the ballroom. Headlines spread across every screen. "Bride humiliates mother-in-law for villa keys. Gets exposed in front of 180 guests." The clip played on repeat, cut from a dozen cell phone angles. I watched from my living room, the glow of the television washing over the quiet walls. The video had reached 1.2 million views before sunrise. Comments scrolled faster than I could read. "Justice served. That woman's composure deserves a medal." I leaned back in my chair, coffee untouched. They filmed my downfall. I let them film my resurrection. The reflection of the TV flickered across the window, overlaying my face with the light of strangers' praise. The same eyes that once turned away from me now turned toward the truth. Somewhere in the distance, the ocean hummed beneath the morning wind. I exhaled slowly, letting the calm settle in the room. What had begun as humiliation had ripened into memory, public, undeniable, and finally mine. Daniel sat alone in the darkened office. The blinds were closed, but the light from his phone screen carved thin lines across his face. Notifications flooded in, clients withdrawing, contracts canceled, silence from investors. Each ring of his phone felt like a small sentence delivered. Samantha paced behind him, heels cracking against the floor. "She ruined us!" she shouted. He didn't look up. "No," he said quietly. "We ruined ourselves." Her reflection flashed in the glass of the framed wedding photo behind him, smiling, perfect, distant. He turned it face down. The silence of realization is louder than any apology. He stared at the phone again, the screen fading to black, his own reflection staring back. The empire they had tried to build on deceit had collapsed faster than the applause that once crowned their arrogance. He reached for a drink but stopped halfway, his hand trembling over the glass. This was the echo of his choices, returning home. The crash came first, the vase shattering against the wall. "We can still fight her legally," Samantha screamed, her voice splintering like the glass at her feet. Daniel stood by the window, unmoving. "Everything was recorded," he said. "The forged deed. It's done." She spun toward him, eyes blazing. "She planned this!" His answer was a whisper. "Yes, and you walked right into it." Samantha's breath came sharp and uneven. "I was trying to protect us," she snapped. "From what?" he asked softly. "From her truth?" She stared at him, then at the shards scattered across the floor. Some wars are lost long before the battle begins. Her shoulders slumped, the fight draining from her posture. Outside, sirens wailed faintly, their sound distant but drawing near. She dropped to her knees, hands trembling over the broken glass. Her reflection fractured into 100 pieces, each one showing the same face, angry, small, and finally afraid. By afternoon, Michael filed the case at the county courthouse. The folder was thick, the evidence precise. Attempted property fraud, forgery, coercion. Each word typed in black across white paper, unshakable. Linda stood beside him, arms folded, the camera footage open on her tablet. Every frame was time-stamped, every sound clear. The clerk stamped the documents with a heavy thud. Michael nodded once, sliding the file across the counter. "For once," he murmured, "the law didn't arrive late. It arrived with proof." Outside, the courthouse steps glowed under the noon sun. Reporters gathered as the news broke. Elder Justice case. Ocean View Villa scandal. I watched from home, the sound muted. On the screen, Michael's calm face filled the frame, his pen glinting in light. The same pen that had once drafted the decoy deed now sealed their fate. Justice had changed hands, from whispers to evidence, from silence to law. The garden was quiet that morning. Dew still clung to the petals, soft and trembling under the early light. I walked between the rose bushes, shears in hand. The air smelled of earth and salt from the sea beyond the hill. One bloom had turned brown at the edges, its beauty gone. I steadied my hand and clipped it gently, letting the petal fall to the soil. Some things must be cut before they rot the whole garden. The wind stirred the chime above the porch, its sound thin but calm. I moved slowly, trimming what no longer belonged, keeping what still lived. I forgave them, but I won't let them bloom here again. The sunlight shifted through the branches, gold against green. Each breath I took felt measured, deliberate. The villa stood behind me, strong again, untouched by greed. Justice had found its rhythm in silence, and I matched it with every careful cut. Cameras followed her now, not with admiration, but curiosity. Samantha stepped out of her apartment, makeup streaked, sunglasses hiding eyes swollen from sleepless nights. Her PR firm had erased her name from the roster that morning. The phone calls stopped. The invitations vanished. A reporter approached through the crowd, microphone trembling in his hand. "Any comment about the forged property deed, Mrs. Monroe?" he asked. She froze, lips parted, no sound coming. The flashes hit her face like cold rain. "No comment," she whispered finally, voice breaking. The crowd that once cheered now whispered her name, like pity. One woman clutched her friend's arm, whispering, "That's her." Samantha turned away, the cameras clicking in unison behind her. In the reflection of a nearby car window, she caught her own face, smeared, pale, hollow. The same woman who once stood in gold light at her wedding now walked alone through gray daylight, her crown turned to shadow. The knock came softly, almost apologetic. I opened the door to find Daniel standing there, eyes hollow, shoulders sunken. "Mom," he said, voice thin. "I'm sorry." I stepped aside without a word. He entered slowly, his gaze moving across the familiar walls as though seeing them for the first time. The house felt different now, lighter, protected. He sat at the table while I poured tea, the sound of the kettle filling the silence. "She changed me," he whispered. I looked at him. "No," I said gently. "You let her." His hands trembled. I didn't know what I was doing. I placed the cup in front of him. I raised you to be kind, not blind. The words hung in the warm air between us. A tear slipped down his cheek. Forgiveness isn't freedom, it's acknowledgement. I rested my hand on his shoulder. Now go fix the man you lost becoming hers. He nodded, eyes wet, but clearer than before. That afternoon, the mail arrived. One envelope, thick and official. People versus Samantha Reed Monroe. I sat by the window, light pooling across the table. The ocean wind fluttered the curtain as I opened it carefully. The print was formal, the words final. I read each line slowly, letting the truth settle. Justice doesn't need applause. It just needs to exist. The papers detailed what I already knew. Charges filed, trial confirmed, evidence sealed. I folded them neatly, slipped the letter back into its envelope, and placed it inside the drawer beside my villa keys. The same keys they wanted to steal now lock peace instead. I closed the drawer softly and leaned back in my chair. The late light shimmered against the polished wood, the sound of waves faint through the window. I exhaled once, long and steady. What began in humiliation had ended in order, quiet, dignified, complete. We met in my study, afternoon light pouring through the tall windows. Papers covered the table, bank statements, notes, ideas scribbled in blue ink. Michael leaned forward, hands clasped. Linda watched quietly, waiting for my words. I don't want this to end with revenge, I said. I want it to mean something. The air felt lighter when I spoke it aloud. Michael nodded slowly. You're turning pain into architecture. His tone held quiet admiration. Linda smiled, sliding a folder toward me labeled Community Outreach. I opened it, pages filled with sketches of programs to help elderly victims of financial manipulation. Justice punishes, I murmured. Grace repairs. They both looked at me, the silence respectful. Outside, the wind moved through the trees, steady and calm. I reached for my pen and drew a small circle on the corner of the page. A seed, I thought. Something alive. Something that would grow. We sat surrounded by notes and empty coffee cups, tossing names across the table. Silver Roots, Linda suggested. Second Sunrise, Michael added. I shook my head gently. My eyes drifted toward the window where the horizon shimmered in gold over the ocean. Golden Haven, I said softly. A place where no one feels cornered again. They both fell silent. The sound of the sea filled the pause. Linda wrote the name down, the pen gliding slowly over paper. A haven born from humiliation, I whispered. That's how light begins. Sunlight caught the ink before it dried, glowing faintly. We exchanged a quiet nod. No applause, no words, only understanding. Outside, the wind carried the scent of salt and roses through the open door. A new purpose had found its name, and with it, its promise. Linda adjusted the camera on its tripod. I sat by the window, the sea visible in soft focus behind me. Ready? She said. I took a slow breath. If you've ever been silenced, I began, remember, silence can speak too. The words came naturally, each one weighted yet calm. I lost my dignity in a ballroom, I continued, and found it in reflection. The red recording light blinked steadily as the wind moved the curtains. When we finished, Linda uploaded the clip to the new Golden Haven Foundation website. Within hours, the comments poured in. Thank you for speaking for us. You gave my mother hope. I watched the messages scroll by, the glow of the screen reflected in the glass. The same voice they once ignored now filled rooms I'd never seen. The ocean wind stirred again, carrying the faint scent of jasmine through the villa. My silence had finally found its echo. That night, I sat at my desk under the glow of a single lamp. The pen felt heavy, but my hand was steady. I began to write. Daniel, I wrote, this isn't punishment. It's the education you never received. When you let others speak for you, you lose your name. I paused, listening to the ticking of the clock. I still love you, but love isn't silence. The candle flickered beside me, casting shadows across the page. I folded the letter carefully, pressing the crease flat. My handwriting looked older than I remembered, slower but certain. I placed the letter into its envelope, sealed it, and wrote his name in simple ink. I held it for a moment longer, feeling its weight. Then I set it aside beside the vase of roses. Some lessons, I thought, are better read than spoken. The flame dimmed, and the room settled into stillness. The city was still half asleep when I drove through the empty streets. The horizon blushed faintly with the first light of morning. The envelope rested on the passenger seat beside me, its edges worn where my fingers had pressed too long. At Daniel's building, I parked quietly, the engine humming one last note before I turned it off. The hallway smelled faintly of coffee and rain. I walked to his door, the letter in my hand. No knocking, no hesitation. I bent down and slipped it beneath the frame. For a moment, my reflection shimmered faintly in the brass handle, older, wiser, calm. Some goodbyes don't echo, they settle. I turned, hands still steady, and walked back toward the light filtering through the windows at the end of the hall. The car door clicked softly behind me, the sound final but gentle. The sun broke through the mist as I drove away. The hall shimmered with morning light, banners reading Golden Haven Foundation. Justice with Grace, hanging across polished wood, rows of chairs filled with faces, some familiar, some new. Michael stood near the podium, Linda beside him. I held the scissors, the red ribbon stretched tight. The cameras flashed, catching the silver glint in my hair. "What inspired this?" a reporter called out. I smiled. "A glass of Coke," I said softly, and the courage it gave me to stay silent long enough to act. Laughter rippled, then applause followed. The ribbon parted cleanly beneath the blades. Some stains never wash off. They remind us we survived. Glasses clinked in celebration. Sunlight streamed through the high windows, warm and forgiving. I looked around the room, the new beginning built from the ruins of my silence, and for the first time in years, I felt free. The crowd's applause faded into the rhythm of peace. That evening, I watched the television quietly from my armchair. The headline glowed across the screen, "From Scandal to Strength. Widow turns humiliation into national foundation." Footage from the ceremony played, ribbons, applause, my calm smile frozen mid-frame. Then a photograph appeared. It was the same image once used by gossip sites months ago, when I'd been the slapped woman. Now the caption read, "Founder, Golden Haven Foundation." I watched in silence, the sound of the reporter's voice gentle under the background music. They took my story. I rewrote the ending. The screen light shimmered against the silver frame on the table beside me, the picture of my late husband and me in younger days. The wind outside brushed the chimes softly, the same tone I had heard in the garden. The world had changed its tone. So had I. Linda arrived that afternoon, carrying a small box of pastries. "You really changed lives," she said, stepping into the sunlight of the patio. I poured tea, the aroma of jasmine drifting through the open door. "I didn't change lives, Linda," I said, smiling. I reminded them they had one. We sat near the window, cups warm between our palms. The ocean stretched endlessly beyond the garden, its sound gentle and forgiving. Linda watched the waves, her voice quieter now. "You taught me that silence isn't absence," she said. I nodded. "Kindness is just strategy without ego." We both laughed softly. The wind shifted the curtains, scattering the scent of sea salt across the room. She reached across the table, touching my hand briefly. Outside, the waves continued their slow conversation with the shore. I looked at her and thought how peace, like the tide, always finds its way home. Night settled softly over the coast. I stepped onto the balcony, the air warm and scented with salt. Below, the ocean shimmered beneath the moonlight, each wave folding into another, like pages closing on a long story. I rested my hand on the balustrade, the same place where, months ago, I had stood in the rain after the wedding. The marble felt cool, smooth against my skin. Peace isn't silence, it's balance. I could hear the faint hum of the city beyond the cliffs, distant and harmless. Inside, my reflection appeared in the glass door, faint, silver, alive. The woman in the mirror had finally stepped into light. The wind touched my hair, brushing away what was left of sorrow. I stayed there a while, watching the horizon fade from blue to black, until even the sound of the sea seemed to breathe in rhythm with my heart. The day ended in gold. I stood at the edge of the garden, the roses swaying gently around me. The sun dipped low over the water, spilling light across the villa's white walls. The wind lifted my silver hair as I placed the villa keys on the wooden table beside a vase of roses. Their petals caught the fading glow, deep red against the gold. "They wanted the house," I whispered. "I built a home, out of truth." The words felt light, no longer burdened by anger. The same glass that once reflected humiliation now shimmered with peace. The ocean stretched beyond, endless and calm. Justice isn't revenge, it's memory, remembered properly. I looked toward the horizon as the camera of life pulled back. The sea, the villa, the garden bathed in amber. The wind moved softly through the roses, and everything glowed, as if forgiveness had a color. Morning returned with gentleness. The seagulls called from above the cliffs, their cries light and distant. I moved through the villa quietly, my steps soft on the marble floor. The coffee brewed in slow rhythm, steam rising like breath from the past. I poured it into a small porcelain cup and carried it to the window. My hand no longer trembled. Time didn't heal. It organized. The ocean below shimmered in perfect order, each wave folding into another with quiet discipline. I sipped slowly, the taste warm, grounded. Order is the art of peace. The clock ticked in even tempo behind me, a sound once irritating, now comforting. The villa, once stage and battlefield, had become a sanctuary of stillness. Outside, the roses turned toward the sun again. Inside, I finally matched their rhythm. Finally. The morning light spilled through every window, golden and clean. It touched the framed photos on the table. Smiling elders, volunteers, banners that read Golden Haven Foundation. I walked slowly through the room, my fingers brushing over each frame. In every reflection, there was proof of survival. What once imprisoned me now shelters others. The wooden floor glowed under the sunlight, warm against my bare feet. I stopped by one photo, a woman with white hair, cutting a red ribbon, and smiled. The moment looked like someone else's triumph, yet it was mine. I adjusted the frame slightly, aligning it straight. Outside, the wind carried the scent of salt and roses. The curtains swayed gently, like waves returning home. The villa, once echoing with silence, now hummed softly with light. Everything was in its place, calm, alive, forgiven. The mail arrived with the morning sun. Among the bills and flyers, one envelope stood apart, cream-colored, familiar handwriting. Daniel. I paused before opening it, my fingers tracing the letters of my name. Inside was the same letter I had written weeks ago, now folded carefully with a note beneath it. The handwriting was steadier this time. "I've started over. Thank you for teaching me that silence isn't weakness." I read it twice, the words sinking into the quiet around me. He finally spoke, not with excuses, but awareness. I held the letter close, the ink catching sunlight through the blinds. My reflection flickered faintly on the paper's sheen, older but lighter. I inhaled slowly, the air warm, clean. For the first time, I didn't feel the ache of loss, only a calm gratitude that he had found his own voice. Some lessons return like letters, unopened until the heart is ready. The coastline stretched endless beneath the pale sky. I walked barefoot along the wet sand, shoes in one hand, the wind brushing gently against my face. The waves reached for my ankles, then receded like soft apologies. The same ocean that witnessed my humiliation now listened to my calm. Each step left a print, then disappeared under the tide. I paused, watching the horizon blur into gold and blue. The tide never judges what it carries away. Seagulls soared overhead, their cries distant and pure. I closed my eyes for a moment, feeling the rhythm of the sea inside my chest. The water was cold, but kind. When I opened my eyes, the world looked softer, as if forgiven by its own vastness. I smiled, the sound of the surf wrapping around me like a promise kept. Something pale glimmered by my feet. I bent down and picked up a seashell, small and smooth, its spiral edges kissed by the tide. I held it to my ear. Inside, a faint murmur, the echo of the same sea that surrounded me. Even silence remembers sound. I whispered it to myself, smiling. The shell fit perfectly in my palm, as if shaped for this moment alone. I turned it slowly, the sunlight catching its pearled surface. You can't erase echoes. You can only outgrow them. The waves rolled closer, touching my toes, retreating again. I looked up at the horizon where the ocean met the sky. No line, no border, only continuity. I slipped the shell into my pocket, carrying the sound of memory with me. The camera moved through bright halls filled with voices and laughter. Volunteers typed at desks, greeting elderly visitors with warm smiles. A woman in her 70s held a cup of tea, tears glistening as she read a pamphlet labeled Golden Haven Foundation. On the wall behind the reception hung a framed quote, "Grace is justice without anger, Catherine Monroe." The sunlight caught its glass, reflecting movement and life all around. Papers shuffled, phones rang, conversations flowed. She built a structure stronger than resentment. The organization pulsed with quiet energy, proof that something good had taken root. A volunteer adjusted the framed quote, straightening it. In its reflection, people moved like waves of purpose. Outside, the golden logo shimmered on the door as it closed behind another visitor carrying hope. The light stayed inside. Linda arrived one last time, her car pulling up under the bougainvillea arch. I met her at the door, tea already brewing. She smiled, her eyes softer than before. "You did it, Catherine," she said quietly. I shook my head. "No," I replied. "We all did. I just built the frame." Steam curled between us as we sat by the window. The photo of the ballroom scene hung nearby, the one where the Coke had once spilled across marble. The sunlight touched it now, gentle and forgiving. Linda reached for my hand, hesitant, then pulled me into a brief hug, the first in this entire story. We both laughed softly, surprised by how natural it felt. "Real strength," I whispered, "is collaborative silence." She nodded. Outside, the wind brushed through the roses, bending but never breaking them. When she left, the house felt neither full nor empty, only complete. Monarch Bay stood silent under fluorescent cleaning lights. The ballroom was stripped of glamour, only echoes remained. I walked slowly across the marble floor, the same space where humiliation once burned through me. My footsteps sounded softer now. I stopped where the Coke had splashed, where laughter had once sliced through silence. The stain was gone. The marble gleamed spotless, almost too clean. I knelt, fingertips brushing the cold stone. My reflection shimmered faintly. Older, steadier. "It's gone," I whispered. "But it happened, and that's enough." Forgiveness isn't erasure. It's acknowledgement. I stood, glancing at the golden chandelier light above, the same that had once witnessed cruelty. Now it only illuminated truth. As I turned to leave, the floor reflected a single silhouette walking toward peace. Mine. Back at the villa, I sat by the balcony where the horizon met the sea. The journal lay open on my lap. I wrote slowly, each word steady. They thought the story ended when they hit me, but it began when I stood still. My pen paused. The sea breeze lifted one page, curling its corner toward the light. Stillness isn't surrender, it's awareness. I traced the edge of the notebook, then closed it gently. The reflection of sunlight danced across my face. Gold, soft, infinite. The wind carried the faint sound of waves rising and falling like breath. I exhaled, matching their rhythm. The house behind me stood quiet, but alive, filled with memory and meaning. Somewhere below, a rose petal drifted across the garden. I let it go. The camera drifted over Ocean View Villa at dusk. The sky blushed gold and lavender. The roses swayed in the wind, petals glimmering like small embers of the sun. On the garden table rested the villa keys, untouched, beside a framed photograph from the Golden Haven launch. My voice lingered softly through the air. They wanted the villa. They took my silence. But I turned both into freedom. Justice isn't revenge, it's memory, remembered properly. The wind grew stronger, carrying the last light across the garden, through the open windows, into the quiet rooms. The sea shimmered beyond, endless and forgiving. The camera pulled back, slowly revealing the full villa glowing against the horizon. Every truth finds its voice. Mine found peace. The wind rose once more, then everything dissolved into gold. The mornings felt lighter now. Each day brought new letters, thick envelopes marked in uneven handwriting. They came from widows, veterans, retired teachers. Some sent photos, others only words. One note read, "You reminded us that dignity isn't a privilege." Another simply said, "Thank you for speaking for us when we couldn't." I read them slowly, one by one, their words filling the silence with something bright. My silence had multiplied into a chorus. I stacked the letters neatly beside the villa keys on the table. The sunlight from the window slipped across their surfaces, warm and golden. Outside, the sea whispered its steady rhythm. I breathed in deeply, letting the gratitude settle like calm water. These weren't just letters. They were echoes of lives restored. I smiled, knowing that the story that began in shame had become a language of hope. The conference room at Golden Haven was bathed in morning light. Linda stood before the board, reading from a report. "We've reached 3,000 assisted cases," she said proudly. Applause rippled through the room. I listened quietly, hands folded. When the noise faded, I spoke softly. "Make sure they don't just get help," I said. "Make sure they feel heard." The team nodded, pens paused midair. Justice isn't paperwork, it's presence. The blinds shifted as wind moved through them, casting stripes of light across the polished table. Linda smiled, jotting down a note. Around us, the hum of printers and conversations filled the air. Busy, purposeful, alive. The foundation had grown beyond names and walls. It had become a heartbeat. I looked at their faces, young and determined, and thought, this was the sound of quiet justice continuing. The invitation arrived on university letterhead, elegant and simple. Santa Barbara University invites Mrs. Catherine Monroe to speak at the seminar Integrity in Modern Inheritance. I read it twice, unsure at first. Then I smiled. Some lessons need a face, even when the story had none. I placed the letter beside my notebook, the sea breeze lifting its corner. To speak now, that's my quiet revenge. The afternoon light shimmered across the window pane, filling the room with soft reflection. I could almost hear the murmur of future students, the questions, the quiet awe. The idea no longer frightened me. It felt like continuation. I picked up my pen and wrote a simple reply. I accept. The wind carried the scent of roses through the open window as I sealed the envelope. The world, once cruelly loud, now listened. The thrift shop smelled faintly of dust and lavender. Samantha folded a dress, smoothing its wrinkles carefully. A customer looked at her, curious. "You're that bride, aren't you?" he asked gently. She paused, then nodded once, her smile small and tired. When he left, she turned toward the shop window. Outside, a young mother bent to tie her child's shoes. The child laughed, pure and unguarded. Samantha's eyes lingered on them, on what she had lost. Punishment came quietly, in the form of reflection. Her own reflection in the glass looked older, softer. She picked up another garment and folded it again, slower this time. The sunlight spilled across her hands, illuminating the faint lines that time had carved. For the first time, she didn't flinch from it. The bell above the door chimed. She whispered a small thank you, to no one in particular. The foundation's office hummed with quiet purpose. Daniel sat beside an elderly man, helping him fill out the intake form. His handwriting was careful, almost reverent. Across the room, I stood by the doorway, unseen at first. He looked up, sensing my gaze. Our eyes met. No words, only a small nod between us. Steady, understanding. He finally understood what inheritance really meant. Not property, not pride, but continuation. The man beside him smiled, grateful, unaware of the story between us. Daniel handed him the pen, guiding his trembling hand to the signature line. Light from the window framed his face, softened by humility. I felt something inside loosen, the last knot untied. When he glanced back again, I nodded once more. Then I turned away, leaving him to the work of repair. Some redemptions don't need forgiveness, only service. The villa glowed in soft amber as dusk settled. It had been exactly 1 year since that wedding, the night that ended and began everything. I lit a single candle on the dining table, its small flame steady against the draft. Anniversaries are not for mourning. They're for measuring how far you've walked away from pain. The glass around the candle caught its light and doubled it, reflection meeting reflection. I sat quietly, listening to the faint hum of the sea beyond the windows. Even darkness deserves a birthday. The wind moved gently through the open door, flickering the flame but never extinguishing it. My eyes closed. In the silence, I didn't relive the pain. I measured the distance I had traveled from it. The candle stood tall, glowing against the glass like a promise fulfilled. Linda arrived carrying something wrapped in brown paper and string. "A small surprise," she said, placing it on the table. I untied the cord slowly, peeling away the paper to reveal a watercolor painting. The villa bathed in gold, roses blooming across the garden. "It's called Stillness," she said, smiling. I studied it for a long moment, tracing the brushstrokes that captured the same light I saw each morning. "It's perfect," I whispered. "Some memories deserve frames, not scars." We stood side by side, the painting catching the evening glow. Linda laughed softly. "You gave silence a masterpiece," she said. I smiled. "No," I replied. "It painted itself." Outside, the sea murmured faintly, the same rhythm now alive in color. Healing had found its form, quiet, framed, eternal. Dusk poured gold over the balcony rails, spilling into the open air. I stood alone, watching the ocean shift from blue to amber. The horizon shimmered, seamless between sea and sky. My reflection appeared faintly in the glass door beside me, merging with the horizon's light. For years, I chased peace. Turns out it was waiting here, at the waterline. The breeze carried salt and warmth across my skin. The world looked endless, yet contained. Reflection isn't vanity, it's verification. I exhaled, steady, eyes half closed. The waves moved in rhythm, as if answering the heartbeat I had finally learned to trust. Slowly, I reached for the railing and smiled. The image of myself dissolved into the light, leaving only the sea, calm, infinite, aware. The screen opened with a narrator's voice, young, confident. Mrs. Monroe's Golden Haven Foundation has now expanded to 5 cities across the country. Images followed. Volunteers packing care boxes, elderly couples laughing over tea, banners reading "Justice with Grace." In the main office, a framed photograph hung proudly on the wall. Catherine Monroe, founder, 2025. The camera lingered on her smile, captured mid-light. One woman's silence built 1,000 voices. The narrator continued. Her story became a movement, from humiliation to hope. The montage ended with sunlight flooding through open doors, staff welcoming new visitors. The music softened, then faded to a single still frame of the villa by the sea. The caption appeared beneath, "Legacy, ongoing." The wind carried through the final shot, gentle, golden, eternal. The afternoon wind swept softly through the villa, lifting the curtains in slow waves. Light spilled across the floor like water finding its path. On the shelf, a single glass stood, the Coke glass, clean, unbroken. The surface caught the sunlight, scattering tiny reflections across the wall. The same glass that once carried humiliation now simply existed. Silent, ordinary, forgiven. The breeze brushed past it, making it shimmer as if breathing. My voice lingered through the quiet. The things that once shamed you can sit beside you when you no longer flinch. Objects remember, but they forgive too. The wind continued its slow dance through the room, moving curtain to glass to floor, each motion gentle, cyclical, familiar. Outside, the sea answered with a distant sigh. Inside, everything stayed still, and yet alive. Morning sunlight filtered through the branches, warm and tender. I knelt beside the roses, pruning shears in hand. The same bush I once trimmed in grief now bloomed again, full and red. The air smelled sweet, carrying the hum of bees. It wasn't revenge that healed me. It was the decision to keep planting. A butterfly drifted down, landing on a petal I had just touched. Its wings opened slowly, gold and white under the light. You can't replant time, but you can root meaning. I smiled, resting the shears on the grass, letting the wind move gently through the leaves. The petals swayed without fear of falling. Growth had returned, quiet, steady, unannounced. I looked toward the ocean, its blue edge steady against the horizon. Life had learned to continue, and so had I. The camera pulled wide, revealing the ocean view villa bathed in gold. Catherine stood on the balcony, her figure still against the rising wind. The Santa Barbara Bay shimmered below, waves breathing in rhythm. The same melody that opened her story now returned. Wind over water, calm and endless. Her voice drifted through the air. What they took was temporary. What I built? Permanent. Injustice fades, memory stays, and peace walks quietly beside me. The light deepened, turning the bay into liquid amber. Peace doesn't arrive, it emerges from understanding. The camera lingered, the wind rising gently through the roses, across the keys on the table, over the golden frame of the painting's stillness. The horizon glowed brighter, then began to dissolve. The final image, waves glistening, wind whispering over the bay, silence folding into eternity.